my dad was an entrepreneur. He worked his socks off. He brought up 4 kids pretty much on his own. And he ended up with stress-related heart disease. He was diagnosed on the Friday, and by the Sunday, we'd lost him. That's what puts us in fight or flight, right? So when we have too much of this, we're constantly in fight or flight mode. And our bodies can't handle that. We're not designed to be constantly on the lookout for threats.
Hi Bex, welcome to the show today. Let's start just by asking you to define what actually is burnout.
Hi Matt, thank you so much for having me. And the best question you could have asked at the beginning, because there is so much confusion as to what burnout actually is. Like, I see the word overused a lot now, like everyone's burnt out. So a really good way to clear it up is kind of to talk about the difference between stress and burnout, right? Because we all know what stress is, or we think we know what stress is, and we need stress, right? Stress is a motivator. I love a bit of good stress, right? It makes me turn up to podcasts and go and put myself out there and go do things and strive for promotions or whatever. You know, we need stress and we need good stress. And then on the other side, we have burnout. And this is where we have basically a buildup of chronic stress and chronic bad stress. So the best way to explain the difference is kind of in your energy levels, right? When you're stressed, you're really high energy, you're frantic. You're like, I've got to get all this stuff done. Like, you know that kind of feeling that I'm talking about, right? It's a bit chaotic. When you're burnt out, your body has basically depleted itself of energy. And so your energy levels are the complete opposite end of the scale. Everything slows down. You kind of get this like, oh, what's the point? Why am I spinning my wheels? I never get to the end of my to-do list. I can't be bothered. I'm not doing this anymore. And that is kind of the best way to differentiate between whether you're a bit stressed and a bit, there's too much on the to-do list and you just want to get through it all, and then you have the weekend off and you're ready to go again on Monday, or whether this is a long-term thing where you're like, I can't actually get out of bed right now. I think that's the best way of explaining the difference between the two.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say, stress is sort of good. And there's certainly that working under pressure. Quite often we need deadlines to get things done, or people to just push you outside of your comfort zone to actually be able to, learn something new, try something new. So I guess, there's the benefits there. I guess, is there positive stress and negative stress?
Yeah, so there's lots of different types of stress, actually. So, we have positive stress, and this is the things that, like I said, helps us put ourselves forward for things. It drives us for promotions, or, all of those goals that we set ourselves. We generally use positive stress, like the deadline of a talk coming up. Oh, I best write my talk and actually rehearse my talk before that deadline, which, if you're anything like me, you'll do it the day before. But we need that positive stress to drive us forward as humans. It's a good thing. And then we have, acute stress. We have those little stresses throughout the day that bug us. And then we have big, horrible chronic stress. And this is, we tend to see this a lot at work, where perhaps you've got too many deadlines, you've got too many things going on, you're juggling too many balls. If you work for someone else, then it might be that they're piling a lot on your plate. If you work for yourself, you might be piling a lot on your own plate. And there's a lot of different reasons why we might see that, a lot of internal reasons why we might see that. But when that builds up, it produces cortisol in our bodies, which is the stress hormone. And that's what puts us in fight or flight, right? So when we have too much of this, we're constantly in fight or flight mode. And our bodies can't handle that. We're not designed to be constantly on the lookout for threats. Those threats being too much work or the commute or, all of those things. So eventually it burns us out. It is literally, it's like lighting a candle and it getting down to the very bottom of the wick. We cannot keep going.
Yeah. But yet we see people burning out. So do we just not recognize those warning signs? Maybe it's, does it affect entrepreneurs slightly more because we've got this goal and we feel that the only way to achieve it is just to keep working and keep working and keep pushing and never actually taking a break?
Yeah. So it's really interesting actually, because when I first started talking about burnout and that kind of stuff, there wasn't a lot of information about it. And I created something called the Anti-Burnout Club, which is now a social enterprise. But originally my idea was, oh, it's going to be all self-employed people like me who have burnt out and they don't know what they're going to do. And when I first started this, the majority of people that came to me were not self-employed. They weren't entrepreneurs. And I was really surprised. They were people working in schools, they were NHS workers. And that's why that arm ended up becoming a social enterprise. So I was like, there's thousands of people that need help here that are burning out, but that can't necessarily afford or, get all of the things that maybe other people can. So that was kind of that thing. And then, as we talk about kind of people who are self-employed, it's really interesting because you can't go to the workplace of someone who is self-employed and talk to their boss and say, right, you need better boundaries in place, because guess what? We're the boss. So we're not going to listen to ourselves, right? So it's really actually hard as someone who's an entrepreneur, as someone who's self-employed, to take a step back. The thousands of people that I teach self-care and boundaries and all of that kind of stuff in my social enterprise arm are much more receptive than if I go and sit down with an entrepreneur and say, right, okay, so we need to take a little bit of a step back to progress your business. They're like, absolutely not. No way, I'm not doing that because it will ruin my business and blah, blah, blah. Of course it doesn't. Of course, there is a very good reason why we need to rest and why we need to take a step back. But I would say in terms of who do we see burnout in the most, it is really a 50-50 split between employees and the self-employed, but it's for very different reasons that they might burn out. So employees don't have that autonomy to be able to make those decisions. And the self-employed, I think we operate a lot in feast or famine. We're very scared to say no to work and to set boundaries, and our clients become, our bosses that are overloading us. So yeah, it's a very interesting difference to see between the two.
Yeah. And I mean, we talk a lot more about burnout now, and even the mental health discussion and things like that is spoken about much more. Is burnout more of a modern phenomenon? Is it, based around the fact that actually life now is particularly stressful? We're always connected. There's social media, there's emails on our phone, there's stuff going on. There always seems to be something to do. Whereas was this not the case 200 years ago or whatever?
Well, I think we get a lot of sensory overload nowadays. I was actually just before this talking to some people about sensory rest and how we can kind of shut off from sensory overload. But I think that there's a lot of discussion I've seen recently. Well, back in my day, we didn't get burnout. We just worked through it, and we always get the back in my day people. Yeah. But then to kind of bring this to reality. So my dad was an entrepreneur. He worked his socks off. He brought up 4 kids pretty much on his own. And he ended up with stress-related heart disease. He was diagnosed on the Friday, and by the Sunday, we'd lost him, right? And he was burnt out. He was the definition of burnt out by this point. He was 60 years old, and he had worked to the bone. And I think about the back in my day crew, and I think, well, actually, no, because if we look statistically, if we look at things like stress-related heart disease, that has been going on for a long time. Yes, we didn't really talk about burnout. We didn't really have a definition. The World Health Organization only defined it in 2019. So we're seeing the word a lot now. But I do believe that, if we look generationally, this isn't a new thing. This isn't something that's just cropped up because, we're always switched on now. This is something that perhaps comes from a much deeper place. And that, is generally in us trying to prove ourselves, for example, or our conditions of worth. I am only worthy if I work really hard. And this is something that I talk to people a lot about. What makes you feel worthy? Well, I feel worthy when I work really hard, when I work to the bone, and people go, wow, you've done a really great job, you've worked really hard. And actually, we can put that pressure on ourselves for lots of different reasons, but it is definitely not a new thing that we feel like this, and that we've got someone to impress somewhere. I don't know who it is, an old teacher that told you you're going to work in Woolworths, or whatever it is. There is someone there in the back of your mind going, work a bit harder, push yourself, say yes. You can't say no, don't set those boundaries. And I think, if we go back in time for a very long time, that's always been there. It's just become a lot harder to actually switch off now in the modern world.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting what you're saying there about people wear it as a badge of honor, don't they? Hard work. I mean, I've been guilty of joking to people who are employed, and when they say they work 40 hours a week, I used to say, oh, I'd love to be part-time. But because you wore it as a sort of it was success because you were really busy, but in fact, I know personally it was affecting me, physically and mentally, but when do we need to start seeing those signs of burnout? Because like you say, a bit of stress is good. How do we need to balance it? And I know that's quite a big wide question there, but what can we look at doing?
It's hard, isn't it? Because it's seeing those warning signs. Now, this is really interesting because I've burnt out twice. And you would think that someone that talks about burnout all day, every day, and tells everyone about the warning signs, that I would see the second one coming. I didn't. But we have these warning signs that when you look at them individually, you just think, oh, I'm a bit stressed out, or I'm a bit overwhelmed, and so on. When you then add them up, and particularly in hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, you can see that these are sort of flashing warning signs. So a lot of the things that I tell people to look out for are things like starting to feel detached, not being able to recharge after rest. So if you're, finishing work at 5 p.m. on a Friday and you've got the Sunday scaries and you still feel exhausted and you're like, I can't believe I have to drag myself out of bed on a Monday, that's a warning sign. We find that we often move towards more numbing activities. So scrolling, Netflix, we don't want to go out and do all the things that recharge us because we've got that whole, what's the point? Making mistakes. This is something that I see a lot. My husband is a fantastic business owner. He's grown his electrical business to 7 staff, and he does, incredible. I noticed him burning out when he started to make mistakes on quotes and invoices and was losing thousands of pounds. I'm like, oh my goodness, Jake, what are you doing? He's like, I'm so exhausted. And this is when we just had our baby as well. So fully understandable. Yeah. And, just dropping the ball on things that you never would before. You're like, why am I doing that? And this kind of then reinforces this, I'm not good enough, I can't do this. And this is where we see the real shifts. And then the thing that actually, so when I burnt out the first time, I was running a massive international content agency. And every other day I was coming in, I was picking up someone's cold or flu or bug, and I was having to go home. I'd take a couple of days off, rest, go back in, a couple of days later, getting ill again. And so I went to the doctors and was like, I'm starting to feel really ill all the time. There must be something wrong with my immune system. I'm really not feeling good. And it turns out that when we have this high amount of cortisol in our bodies all the time, it's damaging our immune system, right? So we're picking up every single cold and bug and flu that's going around. And that was the biggest warning sign for me. It was like, oh, okay, something really, really needs to change because I'm going the same way as my dad. I'm getting ill, and I was in my mid to late 20s when I went through burnout the first time. So, I was like, I'm too young to be this stressed. So yeah, they're the kind of warning signs. And when you add them all up, you can start to see the bigger picture. But it is really knowing what they are and being able to spot them that's kind of key, really.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting there is you say that actually quite often as we're burning out, we get into that stage of, oh, what's the point? Why bother? Yeah. You end up doing activities that aren't actually going to help you get out of the burnout. No. You actually almost do the opposite, the doom scrolling or, turning to drink or food or whatever. When in fact, actually going out, exercising, things like this would really benefit you. But you've almost slipped a little bit too far. So is one of the keys having those conversations early, recognizing signs, both I guess in yourself, but also in, you know, your friends, your family, people you work with, etc., and being able to encourage them to actually, I say take a break. I don't necessarily mean, well, I don't know what is take a break. Is it just doing something to relieve some of that sort of nasty stress?
Yeah, so I always say it's a lot easier to prevent burnout than it is to cure it, right? Once you're in burnout, there's no holiday that's going to get you out of
No.
it, right? 2 weeks in the Bahamas might sound lovely, but you're still going to be burnt out when you come back. So really the key is to get to it before you can't drag yourself out of bed. So unfortunately for me, the first time I didn't, the first time I was actually in London, I was doing some stuff at the Shard. I'd been basically invited to do study for an MBA with Warwick Business School, right? I had no previous qualifications. I'd left school at 15 and they said, come and do a master's in business. We're going to give you a scholarship. And I was like, yeah, amazing. So I went to the Shard with this like intense week. We did 3 days. And on the 4th day, it was supposed to be a whole week. On the 4th day, I woke up in my hotel room and I couldn't move, like physically could not move. And I rang my husband and I was like, I can't get out of bed. And he's laughing like, oh, right, okay. I was like, no. I feel like I'm stuck. Like I am so exhausted. My body is like lead. I ended up having to get a taxi from the hotel in London to my home, which was about an hour and a half's drive away, because I couldn't physically think of even getting on a train and getting home. And when we reached that point, it takes a long time to get out of it. And this isn't, taking a break. This was going to therapy. This was really digging into why I felt I had something to prove and why I was, putting myself in these positions where I was working 15-hour days. I was also trying to do this MBA. I was, trying to do all these things. So there was a lot of work. And I would say it took me a couple of years to really, really get out of burnout. Now, if you can spot it early, you don't have to get to the point where you're, literally stuck to the bed. And this is like you say about having conversations with people, saying to people, oh, things seem busy. Are you okay? Like, are you feeling a bit stressed? Do you want to go talk? Do you want to go for a walk? And then I have something called the 5 foundations of wellness. So when I burnt out the first time, I'm a big knowledge gatherer, right? I was like, what is this and how can I deal with it? And what are all the different things that science says I can do? So I basically tried everything. Like it was a crazy like self-care mission. I was trying things like yoga, which I liked, meditation, I liked, running, I did not, that didn't stick. Trying all of these different things. And that kind of led me to this 5 foundations of wellness, which I say to everyone, if you can integrate these into your day, you will prevent burnout. And people are like, I don't have time to do these things. And this is about fitting in little micro moments. So the 5 foundations are the basics, which is your food, your water, and your sleep. Physical health, so movement. Connection to yourself, so being mindful of yourself, but also social connection to the world around us. That's a really important one. Then we've got mental well-being, which is foundation 4. And then foundation 5 is growth. So we don't just want to get back to like, oh, I feel okay. But as human beings, we want to flourish, we want to thrive, right? So this is all about our kind of self-development and betterment and setting goals and stuff. So what I generally say to people is, which one of those 5 do you feel is lacking for you right now? Most people go, the basics, but I want to do something better than that. I don't get enough sleep, but I don't care about that. Tell me about Qigong.
It sounds too easy, doesn't it, almost? It's like, we all actually know we should get enough sleep, that we should eat well and we should drink more water. No, give me another cure, because that's too easy.
Give me something I can wear on my wrist that tells me I need to sleep. But so then you say to someone, which of those 5 needs a little bit of TLC? And give it a little bit of TLC. You don't have to focus on trying to balance all 5 at once. That's, it's not going to happen. No. But if you can go, oh, I've really been like, mine this month is connection. Like I haven't really spoken to people. I've been a bit inward. Happens a lot in winter. So I'm like, right, I'm going to reach out to my friends. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And just fitting in, a text here and there, or I'm going to go meet a friend for coffee and a walk around the park. Nice connection to a friend, connection to myself, being a bit mindful, connection to nature. Brilliant. That's half hour out of my day, and I know I'm going to feel amazing for it.
Yeah.
So it is about finding those little things that we can fit in today's. I've worked with the NHS. I've worked with people who work 12-hour shifts, and they go to me, I don't have time for yoga. And I'm like, I know, this is how we can fit it into your day, whether it's a 5-minute, star jumps while you're boiling the kettle or whatever. But yeah, that's the hardest thing, I think, is saying try all of these different things, but also fit it into a day that's already jam-packed and you're already stressed. Most people go, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. I guess, we often hear that I don't have time, but I guess, I've spoken to a few people. It's not about no one has time. What you've got to do is make time, and it's prioritizing your time throughout the day and ensuring actually this becomes a priority, because otherwise, like you say, it creeps up and then suddenly it's really hard to get out of. And we see it with just looking after our bodies in general, don't we? If your toe hurts, you suddenly realize you've got toes, whereas prior to that, you ignore them.
Yeah.
And it's probably the same, that actually you've got to take some time to actually ensure that you don't get to that burnout, rather than waiting till you're burnt out and thinking, oh, I'll fix it then.
Yeah. And I call this a cycle of unwellness, right? Where we go, I don't have time. I've got so much to do. I don't have time to fit any of this stuff into my day. And then so we work. All of a sudden we hit a point and we're forced to take time. They say, make time for your wellness or you'll be forced to take time for your illness. Yeah. And we're forced to take time off. We're really stressed because we have to take that time off. And then we fit in all the self-care. Okay, I'm going to do some yoga. I'm going to go swimming and I'm going to do all these lovely things just so I can get back to work again. And then the to-do list is still there. It's not going anywhere and it never will, So really it's about breaking that cycle. It's about going, right, I've got 5 minutes here. I've got 10 minutes there. James Clear, Atomic Habits. We all know that wonderful book, Habit Stacking, After I brush, or while I brush my teeth, I'll have a little mindful moment. I'll check in with myself. Whilst the kettle's boiling, I'm going to do some star jumps. Thinking about how can I put this into my days? And this is something that I've always spoken about. And then I had a child and I was like, oh my God, even more so do I need this, because there's the whole, everyone's got the same 24 hours. And no, we don't really, it is also dependent. But we do have that little 5 minutes and we do have to make really tough choices on what we do on those 5 minutes. We can scroll on Instagram or we can have a kitchen disco, so it is about, and it's easier said than done when you're already in burnout, which is why it's harder to get out of, because when you're already in that phase, you're like, I just want to scroll and nobody's going to tell me any different, so that's why I say it's easier to prevent.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned they're having a child, and I think actually that almost proves that we can make time for things, because I think back to, I've got 2 children. Think back to times when I didn't have children. Well, I was really busy then. So, so how am I physically fitting it in? But you do. Because you adjust your day, you make time. There's a priority there, that you're going to concentrate on. And, obviously having a child is a huge priority, but equally so is having yourself and looking after yourself. And I think often we are maybe very good at looking after everyone else and not looking after ourselves. And I know I've heard this from other people, actually, some of us who have suffered from burnout or suffer with mental health or whatever it is, we're very good at supporting other people because we don't want them to feel like that, but we're less so supporting ourselves.
Yeah. And I would say 90% of the people I've ever worked with are caring for other people, whether it's caring in their job role, caring for children, caring for, we've got the sandwich generation that are caring for their parents and their children. So I think, that is a big part of what can drive burnout. And I always say, if you detached yourself from you and you looked at everything you were doing for other people as a friend, what would you say? you'd say, oh, Bex, you really need to give yourself some of that time. You really need to look after yourself, because the thing is, if you don't, you then won't be able to give them the best either. And if you
Mm.
struggle to do things for yourself, I always say pin it on someone else, right? I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for my daughter. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for my husband, because we find it selfish to do these things for ourselves. So if we can say, I'm doing it because it will make me a better mum, or, I'm doing it because it will make me a better husband, or whatever else, then all of a sudden you've kind of shifted that perspective and you're like, okay, this isn't for me anymore. And you see this, when people are trying to give up smoking or drinking or whatever, you kind of pin it on someone else. I'm doing it so that I'm the best version of myself for someone. So
Yeah.
if you can do that, I'm integrating more rest into my day so that I can be the very best version of myself when my daughter comes home from nursery. That's a little trick there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was one of my past guests, Paul McCleary. He said, it's okay to be selfish as long as you're considerate. And, what he was saying is, yeah, if you need to go and do something for yourself, that's fine. That's not selfish, actually, because as long as you're considerate to everyone else and, you're doing it for the greater good. And I often tell the story how, I might have, it's a whole busy weekend and actually I should be dad, but I sort of say, well, look, you can have grumpy Matt for the whole day, or why don't I go to the gym quickly for an hour, come back and then you get good Matt for the rest of the day. So actually, would you rather have good time or more time with me? And
that's a great example.
Yeah, just looking after yourself. So talk to me about who you said about that split between entrepreneurs and people who are employed quite often in healthcare. How do you work with these people? What's the first step to getting those conversations going? Because do people not realize they're burning out?
Yes and no. I think when I go into workplaces with my sort of workplace wellbeing consultant hat on, it's very different. That generally we see a lot of people who don't realize they're burnt out, right? I'm having conversations with people. I'll sit and I'll generally do kind of your basic surveys, but also just having conversations with people and saying, how do you feel about this? How are your stress levels about this? What do you do at the weekends? What are you doing for fun? Oh, I don't really do anything. You're kind of just waiting, right? Friday, Monday. And that's when I start to see, a bigger problem within an organization when you see a lot of that happening. The people that tend to come to me for the social enterprise arms of the anti-burnout club are already burnt out. Like they know that they're hitting their limit. And it's really interesting because I think because we talk about it more, it's great because it means that more people, are seeking the right help. But again, like I said right at the very beginning, there is some confusion as to whether it's just general stress or whether it's burnout. So sometimes I'll be having conversations with people and I'm like, look, this is a good thing. You're just at the stress level, right? Like, this is great. We can work with this. This is fantastic. And they're like, what do you mean? You're mad. But when people come to me and they're really stressed, great. That's really something that we can work with. When people come to me and they're already burnt out, I send them straight to the doctor, straight to therapy. There is no amount of kind of self-care and sort of well-being knowledge that is going to get you to where you want to be as quickly as you want to be. You need to really dig a little bit deeper, and they're the conversations that are the hardest to have, particularly when you see it in an organization and there's maybe 100 people in an organization and you're seeing 50-60% of them are really at a limit, and you have to turn around to HR and say, there is a massive problem here and this is gonna this is gonna explode your business if it's not dealt with. They then have to go and speak to 50-60 people and say, look, maybe it's time that we provide you with some extra support or some extra help. And they're the difficult conversations to have, because no one likes being told you're on the verge of burnout or you are burning out. Like, nobody wants to hear it. Particularly if, you're super driven and if I tell an entrepreneur they're burnt out, they're like, don't talk to me.
No, I haven't got time. Yeah,
Yeah,
I haven't got time
too
to be
busy for
burnt out.
burnout.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned there that, when people get to that stage, quite often, they go to therapy, and you've mentioned about therapy. And actually, we spoke briefly about quite often we're trying to prove something to maybe a teacher that mentioned saying at school. It might be a parent who did really well, or someone, a bully or whatever. Do you feel that actually quite a few of us almost have burnout, the tendency to work to burnout in us from that early age because of an experience? I'm going to say childhood trauma, and I don't necessarily mean it that harshly, but something that's triggered that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's really interesting. So I always talk to people about kind of like 3 different groups of stresses. So you've got your work related stresses, there's too much stuff going on at work and all of that kind of stuff, toxic bosses. Then you've got your personal stresses, family, financial, that kind of thing. And then you've got your internal stresses. So people pleasing, not being able to set boundaries, trying to prove ourselves. If you actually look at those internal stresses, they are probably fueling the work related and the personal stressors, right? They're propping them up. And I think that, so there's this concept called conditions of worth. And it basically says, I am worthy if you fill in a gap, right? So I am worthy only if I work to the bone. And my conditions of worth came very much from my dad. So when he passed away, I was like, I have to prove myself. I also grew up, the poorest kid in a grammar school, was told I was never going to be anything. I was going to be pregnant at 14, blah, blah, blah. All of that stuff kind of fuels this condition of worth where you think, I have to prove myself. I am only worthy if I, work 12 hours a day. I got very sucked into hustle culture. Remember like Gary Vee before he started talking like all nice now, but when he was like, yeah, if you're watching Netflix, then you're wasting your life. So I got so sucked into that. And I was like, I'm only worthy if I'm working that hard. And to be fair, I made a lot of money in my business. Great. That was fantastic. And then I had this conversation with someone who said to me, if I was reading something out at your funeral, if I was reading out your eulogy at your funeral, what would you want it to say? Would you want it to say, yeah, she worked amazingly hard. She built this great business, but we never saw her. We didn't know anything about her, really, just that she worked really, really hard. Or would you want it to say something else? What would you want it to say? And pretty much within a year of that conversation, I'd closed down my agency and I set up the Anti-Burnout Club and started working on something that was actually my passion, was actually what I feel was my meaning and my purpose. So I think, everything stems from what we've been told as kids. That condition of worth, it kind of gets built up over time through teachers, parents, guardians, people in society that we think are better than us or smarter than us, people on Instagram that we look up to. And that can then fuel this desire to work hard, or this tendency to people please, to not be able to say no, because we feel like if we say no, then we're not a very nice or we're not a very good person. And that has come from perhaps something, again, in childhood. You have to say yes, you have to share, you have to give that to your sister, you have to give us all of your time and energy and whatever. So yeah, I think it can all, they say, it could all be traced back to our childhood. But I think burnout, I think there is an element of something in our past that's perhaps given us this tendency to burn out.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's resonating with lots of people who are listening, that, there are those little triggers, and I've certainly been a people pleaser, and actually I've found some real power in trying to say no over the last few years. And but it did feel very alien at first. It's like, why am I saying no to something? Even though I'd be dreading doing it, or no, I didn't really want to do it, but I didn't want to let the person down. It was like, well, hang on a minute, I've got to look after myself here. But yeah,
So
I
we're
think
so good at working on other people's to-do lists. Do you know what I mean? Like we're so good at saying, yeah, I'll do that for you. And then we look at our own and we're like, oh, there's like a million and one things that I have to do for myself. And that includes, the self-care that we were talking about. But that gets pushed to one side because Sandra down the road has asked, could you help me put up my fence? I'm like, okay, sure.
yeah.
I can't say no. I'm a recovering people pleaser, so yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's so true. I've loved our conversation today.
Oh,
Like,
me too. Thanks.
if you were to give just one simple tip that someone could start implementing almost straight away, what would you say that everyone should be doing in their daily life to help reduce the bad stress and help work towards preventing burnout?
I would say, and I don't know if it's because it's my focus this month, but I would say focus on connection. So connection with yourself, check in with yourself. How am I doing? How am I feeling? Anything stressing me out? Connection with the world around us. So, nature, getting outside. And then most importantly, connection with other people. I feel like we've lost a lot of connection nowadays. And particularly with a lot of people working from home, that's great. I'm a big supporter of that. But don't lose that connection to other people because it is such a key to emotional resilience. And if you want to feel less stress, you need your village, you need a community of people around you. And so I would always say focus on connection before anything else.
I love that. And it's been one of my habits. I realized, I work from home and, even today I'm going to get out and tomorrow I'll be out, and whether it's going to a meeting or just going to a coffee shop and working or meeting a friend, because, otherwise I'd sometimes, get to sort of Thursday and I think, I haven't left the house.
You've spoken to anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. And, working from home has been brilliant for me. And I know, there's lots of discussions about it. I'm sort of pro it, but equally, we are missing some of that human connection. And I know there's been some studies done on, almost like where your wealth sits and how much of a connection you have to people within your community. And, lots of people move to a city, which is brilliant for work and things like that, but you don't know the people around you. Whereas sometimes those smaller communities actually are a bit more close knit.
Absolutely. And I've started to see studies come out that say that loneliness is going to be as big a killer as obesity or smoking, so it's something that I think is really powerful post-pandemic world that we really, really need to start reconnecting as people. And I think most of us thought by 2025 we would be, but I think we're still seeing this kind of resistance to proper human connection. And hopefully over the next few years, we're going to rebuild, but it's still taking time, I think.
Oh, completely agree with that. There's definitely, there are some studies now showing the amount of people who live alone is huge compared to what it was 100 years ago, even though there's, cost of living and, all of that. Actually, so many people live alone, work from home, and actually loneliness is going to be massive there. And we're seeing even sort of childbirth numbers going down. I was reading that sort of this week because it's just less human connection. And I completely agree. I think loneliness is going to be a massive one unless we start to conquer that.
Yeah. And if we don't have those people to bounce off of, we don't have that emotional resilience. And that is such a key to feeling less stressed, because when you have had a rough day, who do you talk to? My husband gets all of it. He's like, but then he does the same, and as long as you have kind of give and take relationship, then it's good for both of you. But if you don't have that person or that community or that group, then it becomes really hard to deal with the stresses in your life.
Yeah. No, completely agree. Bex, thank you so much for your time today. I've
you.
Loved our conversation and hearing more about the amazing work you're doing. So keep it up. And
thank you so much.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try and take some bits on, probably even just pushing that human connection side. I'm active on it, but actually we can always get better. So,
yes, we should meet for coffee in real life.
Yes, that sounds like a deal. Bex, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. And you take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Balanced Ambition podcast. I genuinely hope the stories inspire you as much as they inspire me. If you found value in today's conversation, please share it with a friend. And remember, by subscribing, you won't miss an episode, and it would truly mean the world to me. Stay balanced, and I'll see you next time.